So Jaz, very happy to be with you today. Finally meeting you after quite a long time of hoping to meet you one day. Here we are. And I'd like to start with a quotation from a song that actually was quite important for me way back in the past. And it's from, I'll just come out with a quotation. That is, "Patterns I'm finding, as pain and joy and sorrow mingle, our faces raised in adoration." Mm-hmm. I'm sure you recognise where that's from. I'd like to start with a question directly on the back of that, which is, ancient philosophy has led mankind to observe and to admit the possible existence of a divine organising principle at work within the visible universe. So the question is, do you regard this to be an intelligent principle? And if so, what do you feel you personally owe to it? And what do you feel is owed to it by humanity?
It's a superb question. Patterns I'm finding. Yes, well, when firstly, let me say it's a real pleasure doing this interview, and it's a very unusual interview, and I've been briefed on every aspect of this interview. And I'm just soaking in the fact that we're currently in the Columbia Hotel, and I used to come here in the late 80s, which for a late drink, because this is the bar next door is where all the punks used to gather for a sort of late drink, and I met many people there before 1980, and then here we are now, so quite many years, several decades later, and when I look at back at my life, at the series of immaculately timed coincidences, that with the biggest budget in the world, you couldn't have made it happen. You couldn't have. I mean, what are the odds of being born into a house where a regular visitor, when you were the age of 4, between the age of 4 and 7 or 8, the regular visitor to the house is Brian Jones.
Right.
The odds of that happening, I mean, just go there, the odds of so many things happening, of bumping into Big Paul by random. I mean, how that happened was, I had a dream about meeting someone very, very important 3 days before. I came to London. I immediately acquired a flat for £7 a week, a 3-bedroom flat for £7 a week. Tells you how long ago it was. Hitched back down that weekend, got all my stuff from Cheltenham, from the family house, and moved it into my new flat. On the Monday morning, I went to sign on. Incidentally, I never even got my first cheque, I have to point to that. I went to sign on, and I'm standing in the dole queue, and there's this Indian gentleman with long hair in front of me. He turns around and he says, "Hi, my name's Carlos." I said, "Well, hi, my name's Jaz, and I'm going to form a band." I'm one of these kind of slightly autistic people. And he said, "I know, and I'm going to introduce you to the drummer." There you go. I mean, it all happened within probably under 10 seconds. What I'm talking about,
Amazing.
And then so we did our UB40s, that's what we call them in those days. Yeah. He took me round the corner to Portland Road, number 11 Portland Road. Numbers play a massive role in every member of Killing Joke's life.
One of my questions.
Yeah. We'll get on to that. He took me upstairs, and then I found myself face to face with Big Paul Ferguson, and we remembered each other. It was a state of anamnesis or inamnesis. It means loss of forgetfulness, which is to remember. And if you consider that Plato said that all knowledge is remembering, I remembered Paul, and he remembered me. It wasn't such a pleasant memory. But in a matter of milliseconds, we recognised that it was a moment of destiny. Right. And I had the same feeling for each member of Killing Joke that manifested. I say manifested because, I mean, the odds of meeting a drummer who was interested in a revolutionary sound, who then, after a couple of weeks, said, we must find 2 other people like us. And I said, how? And he said, magic. I didn't know at that stage that he studied magic, because we both studied magic, you see. And so the coincidence of that happening, I mean, that was such a major event. To find anyone remotely like us. So from that point onwards, you can count 6 months from to the time that we actually did the ritual on February the 26th at 3 o'clock. We just went to study in that time, all the principles, and we settled on basically the Rosicrucian philosophy, simply because there were major parallels to the idea of killing joke. And what happened in those 6 months before the ritual is very, very interesting, because the house that I walked into was a house of people studying at a very high level of psychiatry and psychology. And one of them worked at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which is really human behaviour or behaviour modification, if you like. Anyway, and he was a very, very interesting individual that made a massive impact on both Paul and me. He was a guy who came up with the name Killing Joke, actually, because he kept saying, it's a killing joke, meaning, you know, we've been stitched up like kippers, meaning you can take it as broadly as you like. There's a lot of latitude there, which is the argument of that all life is predetermined. Our DNA is wired, so all these events happen. But he told us about the coming rule by corporations and the occult agenda, and he introduced us to the works of R.D. Laing, who I became a very good friend of later. And I have to say that all members of Killing Joke, and over the years we've met, notables like Leary and famous free energy scientists like Dr. Bruce De Palma, and all these great thinkers, and from Crick onwards, the common denominator with them all is that they use psychotropic drugs to have their breakthroughs.
Right.
Pretty much, I would say. Okay. I mean, the system of somomancy is irrelevant there. Whether you use mantra, tantra, psychoactive drugs, the most important thing is the result.
Right.
That's Crick's dirty little secret, they call it. Nobody found out until afterwards. It wouldn't do. The founder of DNA had his great discovery on the influence of LSD. It wouldn't do for this for public consumption, in the same way that we have to doctor the biographies of great people like Gandhi. It's necessary in order to create godlike figures, isn't it?
Right, yes.
Something the internet gets in the way of, possibly. So all these kind of talk about a series of immaculate time of coincidences. I mean, one after another.
Yes.
That's a multitude of questions just there. But then out of that, you have the people like Elon Musk who believe in entropic reduction, which is to say, we're living in a simulated universe, which we opposed that in Killing Joke. Youth pointed out, he said, if that's the case, why is it so shit?
Okay.
And so while I see it on cosmic, but more scientific terms of the Kardashian scale, which is to say, at the moment we're 0 on the Kardashian scale. You have a type 1, type 2, type 3 civilizations who draw all their energy, or type 1, from the planets and the universe, and the type 3 draws all the civilization from the galaxy, and it can create other universes. Right. A type 3 type civilization on the Kardashian scale. So, and in the transition between the 0 and a type 1 civilization, we normally destroy ourselves, which is to say, splitting the atom, And then you have, in the Mahabharata, as you're well aware, we have nuclear war in the Mahabharata. Most people are aware of this. It was an unknown weapon, 6 cubits by 4, that shone in all its splendour, brighter than 10,000 suns. The soldiers threw themselves in the streams in vain. Their hair fell out, their nails fell out.
Right.
Yes. I mean, and Oppenheimer quoted this on the Manhattan Project, which is why he wasn't part of the, the thermonuclear device, which was taken over by Edward Teller, because he became a security risk, because he started talking about nuclear war in the previous era. Of course, there has been a nuclear war on Mars that ended Mars. And there's been nuclear war in Earth's history. We all know that. The area we know is Australia. There was nuclear war over there, and they've actually, the powers that be have actually found evidence. But again, like a whistleblower archaeologist like Dr. Michael Cremo points out, these things are neatly covered up so that we see our civilization is the apex of the pyramid, and everything has been a crescendo up the slope of 52 degrees to our defining state, which is, of course, bullshit. And look, last week 5 days ago, I had a very interesting conversation with Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project, which I'm sure you're aware of. Dr. Stephen Greer, for people who don't know, he was going to do his first event at the United Nations. It was of such great magnitude, but then I believe elements of the government in the USA stepped in, and he was forced to do it at the Washington Press Club, which was basically 300 top scientists and military people taking the oath and then disclosing their work on the UFO phenomena, let's call it, right? Okay. So this is Dr. Stephen Greer's work, and here's my point. I disagree with sudden disclosure, because here's the point. You only have to look at the Rand Corporation's early study in the 1960s of the possible results or effect on society should we encounter a highly advanced extraterrestrial race, or evidence of this. It would affect, of course, the essential fabric of our society. Okay, think about it, okay? Think about it for 1 second. When we find out that all our earth knowledge is bullshit, our mathematics, our theology, our sciences, our notion of history, when mankind discovers this, he goes into a state of collective depression, if you like, which really, if it happens suddenly, like proponents of sudden disclosure, such as Richard Dolan and Dr. Stephen Greer, it would have, in my opinion, very negative effects on society. So I am essentially against sudden disclosure, and I think the powers that be are probably doing it. They're doing it as fast as can be. I mean, last year in the New York Times we had the US Air Force talking about their advanced aerial phenomena software that the pilots used. And so it's starting to filter down, and we're starting, of course, with lots of Hollywood movies, we're starting to slowly accept the idea that possibly, bear in mind, my brother is one of the US's top scientists, and he'll just sit there and laugh at you if you start talking about UFOs, okay?
As all many.
And the thing is, I'm not sure he's so sure anymore. I said to him in my last conversation with my brother, I said, the fact is, Piers, our family is connected to Indian intelligence, military intelligence, and there's no way anybody, even close to our family, would ever get clearance. And you haven't had the tap on the shoulder to initiate you into advanced physics of the unified field because you're at risk because of me.
Well.
And he went quiet at this, because only because of my family's background, and I'm a regular visitor to Mother Russia.
Okay, one more interesting question. So, on the back of everything you've just said, where do you believe we collectively originate from? Where do we come from?
Okay, Why I started with the Kardashian scale is because I'm pretty sure in my studies of the human genome, with what's available out there, and then consulting with people at the very highest level of the mystery tradition, in my opinion, I respect these people and we talk about it. I believe that we've been augmented from already evolving primates by a type 1 civilization, or several, actually. I would say several, probably 3 or 4 type 1 civilizations. And that our planet is used over millennia, over aeons, has been used for hybridization programs by advanced species. However, when you read Francis Crick's directed Panspermia, thank you. When you read Francis Crick's directed Panspermia, which he did with Orgel at the end of his life, which proves beyond any doubt that life on our planet cannot have been the result of a random asteroid hitting it. Cannot prove beyond any doubt, okay? Therefore, Dr. Crick believed in the idea of directed panspermia, that is to say that our planet, as all life on our planet, is seeded by a highly advanced, probably type 3 type civilization. Okay.
So where do you believe?
And so let's just talk about the type 3 civilization, because however you look at it, that in itself is a great architect.
Okay. So if there is a great architect,
no question there is.
Where did the great architect come from?
I think when we melt, once we go above the abyss and above time itself, above the third Sephira, once we've melted time, I guess a type 3 civilization would have probably evolved the same way that we're evolving.
Right. Okay.
There's been 57 different augmentations to the human condition since we were primates.
Okay. All right. So where do you believe we are now at this point in time?
We are in that dangerous place between a type 0 and a type 1 civilization that often ends in tears.
And what does that mean in terms of
that means that we destroy ourselves with nuclear weapons.
Right.
Okay, let's go back. In 1945, when we detonated the first weapons on the Manhattan Project. Let's think about this. If what the physicists say is true, if we affect a particle locally, we affect it universally, which is to say, what we do on this planet when we release several billion horsepower per cubic centimetre in a thermonuclear blast, what we do is, and bear in mind there's been 3,500 of them on the planet, tests, what we do is essentially we're affecting the many worlds with these explosions, which is why 2 years later, in 1947, we had the massive UFO phenomena,
right.
That even President Carter saw, and notables like this. And this was, of course, basically from this time, I think our species has been observed, and we're in a state of how would I put it? Quarantine, possibly.
Okay. Do you believe that those blasts may have ripped some kind of
fabric in the space-time? Yes, I do. Right. I do, and my opinion is, where I agree with Dr. Greer, is that intelligent forces, or how should I put it? The intelligent forces of extraterrestrial forces, I should say. I don't think they want us to weaponize space with nuclear weapons.
Okay.
And if you look at the Disclosure Project, you'll see that nuclear weapons are neutralized on a regular basis over silos, missile silos. They just all go off.
So what part do you think we have in this now in terms of our own responsibility?
Well, we have, you see, technology is on an exponential curve now since, because the goal of all secret societies is to commune with these forces, let's be honest about it. And if you look at the exponential curve in our technological prowess, that has really occurred since our traffic with different species.
Okay.
And you can see that from an occult perspective. The hidden masters, who are they? Well, they are exo forces or exo civilizations. For sure they are.
Very interesting. Could you please explain a little bit about your own interest and adherence to the Egyptian concept of Ma'at?
That's right. Everything in my magical work has been a process of trial and error. I became acquainted with Nima's work when I was about 18 at Atlantis Bookshop, actually. I found a copy of a Cincinnati Journal of Ceremonial Magic, and it made sense to me that there was a feminine current that was started by Charles Stansfield Jones, that was basically developed later by, well, she's gone under different names, Margaret Crosby, Nima, I call her Nima anyway. And her work was very much admired by Kenneth Grant as well. So anyway, I started to work with it. What was different about the Order of Ma'at is they would conduct ritual activity on geomagnetic hotspots or window areas specifically, and this is what I'm into. I'm into the geodetic sciences.
Yes.
And if we look at the annals of the Order of Ma'at and study them as Kenneth Grant did, UFO activity happened when ritual activity occurred pretty much on most occasions. And of course I'm a New Zealander as well as a proponent of Bruce Cathy's work. He did the 3 harmonic equations. Cathy was a pilot and a mathematician who noticed that the UFO phenomena actually occurred in certain places, manifested in certain places. And anyway, to cut a long story short, he works it out, as being a mathematician, that in something called the harmonic equation 3, which he used the number 695, and he said, well, it could be 696. And it's very interesting because this, in the gematria, or however you pronounce it, is the number of the holy word of the Order of Ma'at. 696 is, or 695, as Nima would also contend. And so I realized that the Order of Ma'at and Cathy's work, they were talking about the same thing. And there was a Kabbalistic reasoning to the harmonics of light. And so this became my hidden work, if you like. So since my teens, I've been, I try to spend most of my time in areas that have large, high volcanic activity.
Right.
Countries with large volcanic activity. So
good telluric current.
Yes, exactly. Exactly this. Our prayers and our ritual activity are amplified on these hotspots, and there's a science to these hotspots. I mean, my suggestion would be to orders or fraternities in the 21st century. My suggestion would be to not only time ritual astrologically, but to possibly use the grid point atlas to find out when these trapdoors open and shut and where they are, and to then compare the effectiveness of your ritual activity to what you were doing before. So I think this is something that is important to talk about.
Definitely, absolutely.
I mean, I've seen a smaller version of the Indian rope trick done in these magnetic hotspots. And I pretty much know the how and the why. And of course, I've had the privilege to work on remote viewing with Uri Geller.
Oh yes.
In not so many ways, he showed me how he works, and I apply it to what I'm doing. I mean, when we look at some of the techniques of the Order of Mart, one of them was something called a flame and feather ritual, basically, which I always found very, very effective. It basically allows you to go into the astral and to see a place that you're going to before you go there, and it shows you what to look for. And I realised later that I was kind of, in fact, it's essentially it's remote viewing, the flame and feather ritual of the Order of Mart, and I've used this effectively, and even sort of hardened atheist friends of mine have used this ritual effectively.
How do you see the current of Mart currently playing out in the world we're now living in? At this point
That's very interesting. Let's think about it. Well, everybody has, obviously on this, tuning into this interview, has a good idea of aeonics. That an aeon is essentially a 2,172 year cycle approximately. And that the aeon that we're in now, from 1904 onwards, this is a time of upheaval. It's a harsh masculine current, which needs to be tempered by what's coming, what will follow. What will follow is the Aeon of Mart, ostensibly in 2,172 years' time. But what's happening now is, since that we've torn the fabric of space-time, what was meant to happen in 2,000 years' time exists almost side by side with us now.
You mean technologically, for example?
Technologically, and the most important thing is that we have an agenda for turning around basically the ecocide that's occurring because of the depletion of the bioorganisms on the planet.
Yes.
And it's quite simple to do, essentially. This comes down to moving away from monoculture to permaculture. Look, we're living in a time when many things could happen. Just cast your mind back to 4 years before the French Revolution, when 52 volcanoes went up in Iceland and plunged Europe into 4 years of darkness and crop failure. Yeah. Which initiated the French Revolution. Now, we're there now. We're on the verge of that happening now. Volcanic activity is on the increase. All it would take would be a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan, or a volcano, a super volcano to go up, and we're in like 15 years of darkness and crop failure. And then what are we going to eat? You see? So like, these things are imperative. That we have to increase food supply. We have to move away from the idea of unlimited growth in terms of economics, and replace it with sustainability and human well-being.
Right.
This has to happen because we're on the verge of resource wars now. Everything, all the wars for everything on the planet has been quantified. And, unless we evolve to a planetary consciousness fast, which is really what Magdalene Vacatio is about, fast. At the moment, it's not like the Cold War. We've got multiple nations with nuclear warheads, and bear in mind, these days, 1/3 thermonuclear explosion over London takes out Madrid, Reykjavik, Berlin, Paris, and everything on a 650-mile radius. Okay, so it's not feasible, but yet, all the missile treaties have been scrapped by America, by the West, which is pushing for a unipolar world. And one of the things that I've been talking about with somebody who's a frequent visitor to the Pentagon is a lot of the people in the Pentagon actually believe that by pushing for war, that Jesus will manifest a little bit earlier when we go into nuclear war. You see, the thing is, I have a problem, first of all, with if what the scientists say, that we are all participants in creating reality, and the magicians say that magic is to create change in accordance with the will, the science of creating magic in accordance with the will. Then, if we have apocalyptic cults like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, who encourage vast populations to contemplate apocalypse, that is exactly what will occur. And many of these people are actually, got their finger on the nuclear button. And there you are. Now, this is dangerous, you see. And I urge you to look at Mikhail Gorbachev's latest talk on Hard Talk on BBC, where he says exactly the same. You see, in the Cold War, it was sort of a bilateral system where basically there was a hotline straight to the Soviet Union between Washington and Moscow. But nowadays, with the wars being so fragmented, we have many nuclear weapons of many nations pointing at each other, and we're heading for a complex systems failure.
Right.
You see, with cyber warfare and everything, whereby the activities of one nation can be easily misread by another nation, who then precipitates a first strike. Right. We're really there now.
So with regards to, you were mentioning the Magna Invocata, and it's peculiar that you mention food just before that, and then the Magna Invocata, because I used to use the Great Invocation whenever I sat down to dinner.
Did you really?
Yeah, many years ago, just as a curious aside. But coming on to that, about your work with people like the Lucis Trust, for example, in relation to all these things you're talking about. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, I can tell you now that once I embraced the idea of setting the Great Invocation to music, I was completely under some sort of divine protection to do this, because I've had everything thrown at me and nothing has got in the way of this project. And there was no money, and even when there was the pledge didn't even account for like a third of it, which I didn't even get anyway. And it was only when I embraced the idea of using the Great Invocation on this project that everything went right, and I had the dream, and then the funding was just there.
Right.
And so this in itself was an incredible manifestation. I work directly with I'm a lone wolf, which is to say, my work with Lucis is done on my own, and I measure the magical effectiveness accordingly on my own, basically.
So you put it to test, kind of like
essentially,
almost in a scientific
exactly
way.
this. Yes, and of course everything did manifest. And last week I was an esteemed guest of the United Nations and taken on a tour there. And then, to my horror, I discovered at the United Nations, of course, like I said last night, that America hasn't paid its subs, as it were, and you know, beyond the month of December, there's no more wages for the United Nations. So effectively, unless something happens, I don't know what's going to happen.
Wow, that's quite startling.
That's the state of our globe now.
Right.
Yes, I let me be very clear on this. I believe in global governance, but it's essentially a polycentric global governance, which is to say not unipolar, you know, run from one city in a powerful nation.
Sure. Interestingly enough, on that same theme, in your book you mention, and please tell me how to pronounce the word, is it Kythera? Kythera, the island? Kythera?
Cythera.
Cythera, right, okay. Cythera, okay.
Yeah.
So in the book, in your book, Letters to Cythera, you mention about, you believe that ultimately there would be, or should be, or will be, a unification of all the different groups that are working esoterically with the occult world and so on.
Yes, I do feel this.
So how do you believe that could come about?
Out of necessity.
Out of
Yeah,
necessity.
but yes, you know, it's logical that we're going to embrace a female deity because after massive population reduction and the effects of climate change or volcanic activity, a recovering population will need to adore the source of nutrition that's only the mother can bring, you know. And so I sort of really believe in this idea that it's a healthier archetype, a feminine deity, and that this is what we need to replace this sort of patriarchal or patristic current of the existing religious structures. Yeah, right. I do feel this very much, and that's why Lucis's work with the United Nations from an occult perspective is very, very important.
Right. Mm-hmm. So in the field of art and music and literature, there was you may be aware that there was way back in the past a society run by Tsar Paladin called the Salon Rosequa, or should I say he put.
Oh yes, I'm aware of this. Yes, and there's been attempts at recreating this cafe in the 90s in Prague.
I was going to ask you about Prague as well.
Yeah, and I love this idea very, very, very much, and yeah, I'm aware of what you're talking about, and it's a huge inspiration to me.
Well, it seemed to have a lot of parallels with a lot of your sentiments in your book about wanting to bring something to the fore, that art and music and literature.
Well, let's go back to the early parallels between Killing Joke and the Rosicrucian.
I was going to ask you about the ludibrium and the name Killing Joke.
Yes,
Do you see any parallels with that?
A ludibrium is a divine comedy, as it were. Yes. And of course, you've got to. We all have to admit to the joke of the Rosicrucian movement, which is that there was no secret society. It basically, you know, this 17th century comic book inspired thousands of secret societies. It was a joke in the beginning, and just in the same way that many things that people believe are like the guy who planted acorns and planted a whole forest in France, Bouffier, his name was. He went on to inspire Bill Mollison, the founder of permaculture. Oh, right. But of course, he didn't really exist, but Mollison thought he did. In the same way. So the parallels of Killing Joke and the Rosicrucian movement, I'm just highlighting there before we fast forward to your question, which was again, remind me.
I was asking you about
Paladin,
about the Tsar Paladin and the use of art and music.
Well, all the way through the 90s, Youth and myself, we've had the Society of Ancient Enchantments, and we've had people like Sir Lawrence Gardner and brilliant speakers, and it was very much based on the Salon idea of Paladin.
Tsar Paladin, yeah.
Paladin.
So the thing is I'm actually sort of drawing parallels with some of the sentiments in your own book, because you mention the fact that art and music and concerts and concert halls are just a pale reflection of what the true aim is really behind them.
That's
and
right.
I've always been in accordance with that personally myself.
You see, I'm a revolutionary, really.
Was that not the
our
purpose of
counterculture that you see lurking behind rock and roll, our counterculture, which is global, we have to reorganize society to our liking.
So talk about the talismanic nature of, say, your album Revelations that you mentioned to me just before we started this interview.
Essentially, I'm an animist. Mm-hmm. You know, I believe, like the Maori of New Zealand, that we breathe life into inanimate objects. Like I breathe life into a musical score or into a recording, and then that recording has a life of its own, and it takes me wherever it wants to take me. And Revelations is a very good example of this, where basically I decided to write my future within the lyrics. I was very much influenced by the Nordic system, where basically the three sisters of destiny, Urtha, Verthanthi and Skuld, they're called the Norns in the Nordic. In the Anglo-Saxon, we call this the Word, the three sisters of destiny, who wove the fates of men on their looms. And
my very first band was called The Weird.
Well, there you are. You see, there you are. And so I used Revelations to initiate basically my connection with my holy guardian angel. And what came out of it was one amazing thing, which was, I want to be a composer for a symphony orchestra. I want to study orchestration.
And so you did.
And I could have gone another 30 years without having that singular thought and wasted a lot of time. But that's what came out of that Iceland period and the Revelations period. And of course, it's still working. When I think of chapter 3, Attack Behind Attack, a war behind a war, wide thoughts to broad horizons, a nation at the very least. I'm going for a barbecue with the Prime Minister of New Zealand in a couple of weeks.
Oh, funny. What role did certain people have in sort of taking you to new levels of being and new insights? You mention again in your book about Sam Adler, who used to be
Sam Alder. Actually, I was talking about him last night. Sam Alder, yes. Sam lives on the Isle of Man still. He's older now and
was
retired.
Was he one of the people that had
massively? Yeah. Sam is a very powerful and fantastic Freemason who's at times been my adversary, but generally when push comes to shove, he has protected me and kept me on the right path in my early years, you know? It's one of those funny things. But Sam went to see Killing Joke in '79, and Sam was really into the occult, and being brought up in the Isle of Man, he knew Gerald Gardner as a young boy. And so he loved Killing Joke when he saw him. He was passionately moved by it. And basically, Killing Joke's it was financed by a high-level Freemason from its inception. And always when I've had major problems. While I'm not in the fraternity, I'm a cousin of the fraternity. I like to see myself like that. They've always been there for me, you know. But I'm interested in the more irregular outfits, the people that, of course, I admire, were the group behind the Falconelli project.
Ah, yes, of
the
course.
Falconelli group,
Yes, yes.
which, you know, these people knew about the hidden Sephra of Darth long before anybody else. They hid it in their work, this group, because Falconelli wasn't a person, it was a group of people.
A group,
of course.
yes, exactly.
Connected to Memphis and Mizram through the Belgian Order of Memphis and Mizram, to be quite precise.
To be more precise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So the studies of this group in geodetic engineering really appeal to me. And you know, I'm updating my chapter on CAF because I've discovered so many things since then. And you know, what we talked about earlier in terms of using the grid point atlas to find the latitude and longitude of these window areas, these wormholes, and the precise moment when the trapdoors are open and shut, so we can time ritual activity effectively using this and astrology. We need to compare results. So in one sense, this is a magical super laboratory of the 21st century that we're looking at. And the name of the game is the unification of all secret societies and the restoration of the planet's health and the resurrection of nature itself.
That's a very noble aim and something we should definitely all be working towards.
At the moment, at the highest level in the fraternities, of course, it essentially can only be described as a dialectic between progressives and neo-aristocrats. But my criticism of the current system of super lodges is that we, more than ever, need a responsible, compassionate, philosophical elect to make the right decisions, educated decisions when it comes to nanotechnology and, of course, transhumanism.
All of these issues.
Yeah, all of these issues, you see. Here's what we can't do at the moment is download our feelings. We can download consciousness into the Borgia bodies, but we can't download our feelings. And of course, if you think about humanity, what defines us is our humanity, right. Our compassion, our interconnectedness with our brothers and sisters on the planet, which this modern technology, these Huxley boxes that everybody carries around, is something that they're sort of diminishing, you know. But here's the thing. Let's look at the nightmare scenario for a second. Let's say, just say ostensibly that next year a nuclear bomb goes off, okay? Let's just think about this for a second. And the repercussions of this.
It's unthinkable, really.
Yes, but it's so close. Okay, so then let's suddenly think about Mortimer Wheeler's discoveries at Mahando Daro, where he excavated this ancient city, and he found that all the people in the city had died by being incinerated completely from the air, and they were in a human chain, all linking hands, in a human chain. Okay? And if you consider again Plato's statement that all knowledge is remembering, then we can remember being there when that happened. So if it happens again, you will issue the command to link hands, join and form a chain.
Exactly.
A symbol of our humanity and our eternity.
Exactly. And that's, I do believe, a fine point for us to
It's been so wonderful hanging out with you.
It's been a great thing.
And on a personal level, we can talk about some other things when the camera's off.
Yes,
Thank you so much,
thank you, Jaz.
everybody.
Thank you, Jaz.
Thank you.